December 4th, 1983. This is a memorial service for Jim Willis, founder of Gamblers Anonymous. The speakers are from Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, and Overeaters Anonymous.
Make this more intimate, if you will. You don't have to do whatever makes you comfortable. Harvey. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Corwin. I'm a friend of Jim Willis. You can say hi.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Bob.
Just like we do in all the other organizations that we all belong to. But I thought it would be best for me to open that way here, because there are so many groups represented here, all of which our friend Jim had a great deal to do with. Many years ago, I've lost track of how many years ago it was, Jim, in one of his moments of wit, of which he had many, asked me to do what I'm doing now. And so I'm fulfilling that obligation. I never thought it would come to be. Jim and I go back a long way. Now, Jim, I know everyone here knows Jim. Everyone here in this room is here because they knew Jim. His name is Jim Willis. We can use Jim Willis now. We don't have to say Jim W anymore. We never had to say, in our groups, you don't have to say that within our groups anyway. We do not have to be anonymous with one another. But Jim Willis had a great sense of humor. He was the greatest wit I ever knew. And one thing that he did not want, even when we talked about this many years ago, this was not to be a long face. I can remember him, Norma was taught for this, I can remember him saying, don't stand up there and say, I give you a man who, he doesn't want to hear any of that stuff. This is not to be a belly slapper either, but it's to be a celebration of the fact that we were fortunate enough to know Jim and reminisce a little bit about it. This is not a funeral service. Kind of a memorial meeting, if you want to call it that. And we are here from Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, and Gamblers Anonymous. And some friends who are, unfortunately, not even associated with any of that good stuff. They just don't know what they're missing. Now, this was, what we're doing today is we're gathered here through Norma Willis's kindness. And so the first person I'm going to call on is Norma Willis. Norma Willis, Jim Willis. Give her a hand.
I, too, want to welcome Jim's friends, and I want to welcome the Gamblers Anonymous people, Overeaters Anonymous people, and Alcoholics Anonymous people, of which I am one. Good to see you all here. My remarks will be brief. Jim would have liked this meeting. As a matter of fact, at one time back in the 60s, he kind of dreamed about how nice it would be to have more meetings where our different groups joined together. And he said if people would only think about their common humanity instead of the differences in life, that would be a good thing. And well, now Bob here, our leader, back in their motorcycle days, back in the late 60s, Jim and Bob were into their motorcycles. And Bob, I remember, you said he had a big bag looking one. And he used to sneak up behind Jim and say, pull over, fella. Jim would jump. He said he never was sure whether it was a cop or not. That tells you a little bit about some of their stuff. Jim's belief, well, he believed in God, but he didn't believe in churches. He believed in people. He loved the meetings. One of his favorite sayings was, let him who is without sin throw the first stone. And his very favorite was that we should all love one another. And, well, his poets, he loved Walt Whitman, Jack London, And I like to read about Abraham Lincoln a lot at one time. Someone asked him, forget who was there, Abraham Lincoln, what he thought was the worst thing. And the worst thing that Abraham Lincoln said, ingratitude. Jim said he thought he'd go along with that. And it's impossible, though, for me to think of Jim or remember him without laughing, because that's the way it started. Our very first conversation was about Laurel and Hardy, and about how most people in the world really stop and watch. They do Laurel and Hardy every day. Why don't you pattern your life after mine? Laughter, that was one of the biggest things he gave me. And speaking of his literary heroes, Jack London was one of the biggies for him. And when Jack London was young, he was called the King of the Oyster Bank up in Oakland Bay, and that was a big deal. He was very successful at the oyster fishing business. He was a very young man. So when Jim and I lived on Catalina Island, Jim liked to set up this little city called Sanddab. So he decided one day that if he let many lines down into the water, he rigged up something that would put all these lines in the water, that he could be, by God, the king of the Sanddab Bank. So he worked for days and days on this thing. It was a cylindrical thing, and you turn it and all these lines would go down the water, have wooden slats on it. And the big day came and was bolted on the end of the boat. So he went off, and here's the story he came back with. He let all the lines down, they began to get twisted, and the little boards he put around the cylindrical thing began to snap, come off, and flying this way and that way, one along hitting. So he started kicking it, shaking it, and one thing led to another. He finally got it and threw it in the ocean. He came home with no Sanddab, and we laughed and laughed all the time. Because Jim's laughter was never at the expense of another human being. It was always at our foibles in life, and mostly at himself. Always loved to laugh at himself. He remembers that he'd been going around telling people you can't plenty of Sanddab, and they just had to contact him. So that was partly what he was like. And I'd like to close my few remarks here with a poem that Bob wrote for Jim. I'll read the date here. Jim picked up a little boat when we were living on Catalina, and Bob heard about it, and this is the letter that Bob sent back. Dear Jim and Norma, I shan't go down to the sea and drown in that leaky aluminum boat. I'd much rather by far risk launching my car than to hope that it buckles to float. It may not be kind of keeping my mind on this matter so dear to Jim's heart, but I just can't afford to briskly aboard while watching the seams come apart. For whatever it's worth, I'll not take a berth, regardless of how much he hollers. For soon now, I say, on the bottom she'll lay, and alas, she'll be out $7. And it says, lots of luck, Bob, and then it says, P.S. the truth is I can't wait to get aboard and set out to sea. So, and he did too. He was aboard many times. That's what he said when Jim bought a motorcycle. I won't get on that thing. I'll have nothing to do with it. A few months later, Bob had a motorcycle. So that's all. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Norma. I forgot all about that. He did. He paid $7 for the boat. Actually, and he, this reminds me of a story I read many years ago by Mark Twain called Captain Horatio Hornblower's Visit to Heaven. And the reason I bring this up is I have this feeling that Jim is where he wants to be right now. And in Mark Twain's version of heaven, I'm not going to go through all the ramifications what it took for this guy to get there. We finally got to heaven, and we got another buddy of his up there, and he said, "Do you want to go to a parade?" The guy said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, we're going to go to a parade, and it's going to be a parade of heroes. We have this parade all day. Every day we have this parade of heroes go by." And so they go to this parade. And the parade is just naturally, it stretches off into infinity, with all these heroes going by, and this guy, Captain Rachel, doesn't recognize one of them. And here comes the great military leader. He expects to see Napoleon or Julius Caesar or somebody like that. And it's Ebenezer Smith from Waterloo, Iowa. Well, who the hell is Ebenezer Smith from Waterloo, Iowa? Well, he says in heaven. What we recognize in heaven is we honor the people who have the ability. Whether they ever got to use it or not doesn't count. Now, this Ebenezer Smith could have been and was the greatest military mind that ever lived. But he just never got to use a farmer instead. He just never got. So I see Jim as a great fisherman somewhere. this is what he wanted to be. He dreamed of boats. He lived in boats. He and I sunk a couple of boats. And that's another story. The thing that got him started was you remember the book called Kon-Tiki, the fellows that went on the raft over to the Polynesian islands? Well, he read that, and that made him long for the sea. And from that moment on, he had to have a boat. And he finally got one, and that boat worked out pretty good. But it's like motorcycles; they're never big enough. And finally, he had to get a bigger one and a bigger one. The same thing, we did the same thing with motorcycles. I wouldn't get near the motorcycle because I was scared to death of motorcycles. My father had warned me about what he went through as a kid with motorcycles, how he nearly got killed. And then Jim went in for this open heart surgery that we all hear. It's so famous now, fashionable now to have it. This bypass bit. I think Jim was one of the very first few people to have that. That's the fact. Well, he was. He was one of the very first people to have bypass surgery. And in 14 days after his first bypass operation, he was riding a motorcycle. It wasn't long before he was back to have another bypass, too. He extracted a very unfair promise from me. Because he had this little 90, little Honda 90. I don't know if you know the motorcycle, but a 90 is like a nothing. Just one notch above a bicycle. And he said, "Bob, I want you to learn to ride. I'm going to turn this motorcycle over to you while I'm in the hospital. I want you to learn to ride it, and I want you to promise." And he was a great actor, as you know. He said, "If I live through this, Bob, promise that you'll give me a motorcycle." And I thought, "Well, dying man, what the heck is that?" So I promised him that I'd buy a motorcycle. And then, of course, I had to buy a motorcycle. So we decided to go for a long ride. Then he upgraded into a Honda 450, and I started out with a Honda 350. I forget the numbers. Anyway, I ended up with a great big hog and a big and you got to remember, he was blind, deaf, and couldn't see, and couldn't hear, and we went on a 700-mile motorcycle ride. And I had to keep my blinkers going. He couldn't see. All he could see was the blinkers. He rode that motorcycle all the way up California and back, and bugs in his teeth and the whole works. And he had a great spirit of adventure. I'm telling you these things because these are things that probably many of you don't know about him. A lot of people don't know the great zest for life he used to have. He used to love to get out and run. We used to go to a place where we always had hot roast beef sandwiches on places long gone called the diner car on Western and Olympic, I believe it was. And yeah, remember? We used to go there too. And we come from the office, and he'd always park the car 2 blocks away because he would want to jog. Before jogging was ever fashionable. He was an original jogger. And here he comes. This is before his bypass operation even. Get out and jog. He had a zest for living that I have never seen in anyone that I know of. I quote Jim all the time. This is not something I'm just dreaming up a bunch of nice stuff to say about a guy that just passed away. I talk about Jim all the time. Whenever I talk, I'll say, as Jim used to say, and I quote him all the time. I'm going to make one more quote, then I'm going to shut up for a while. Jim knew me better than anybody ever knew me. Better than my mother, my father, anybody. Jim knew me. Like as though he had taken the top of my head off and looked inside. And the way he always described me, he used to say, "Bob," because I was always in trouble. Always in trouble. I've been sober now in Alcoholics Anonymous over 20 years. But I was sober in AA once. I had 5 one-year birthday cakes. I had 2 two-year birthday cakes and 1 3-year birthday cake. So I had a lot of difficulty in AA, see? GA too. I mean, I decided I wasn't a gambler, I wasn't an overeater, I wasn't an alcoholic. I got rid of all that stuff. But so Jim used to say to me, the trouble with you, Bob Corwin, is that you're a bum who looks like an executive. It was absolutely true. Now, we're going to hear from someone from the organization that he is best known for. We're going to hear from Bill. Bill?
Hi, everyone. I'm Val.
Hi, Val.
I'm a compulsive gambler. I'm here to commemorate, I'm here to commemorate the passing of a man that I loved with all my heart and soul. I was in a very, very, very bad shape when I came into GA, Gamblers Anonymous. I remember sitting in my living room one night in 1967, huddled in a chair, watching Paul Coates. And Paul Coates had 2 gentlemen on with bags over their faces. And I listened, and I watched, and I said, that won't help me. I have seen psychiatrists, I have seen psychologists, none of that junk's going to help me. I didn't want to go gamble that night. I really didn't want to go. But I went. And it took me another 7 years in 1964 before I found Gamblers Anonymous. And usually at a meeting I always say, I literally crawled into GA, and believe me, I literally crawled into GA. And I went to meeting after meeting. There weren't as many meetings, of course, in those days as there are now. There weren't as many people as there are now. And I used to sit in those rooms. Nobody ever extended a hand to me when I came into this fellowship. I crawled around by myself. I went from one end of the city to the other end of the city. It didn't make any difference. If there was a night, if there was a meeting, I was there. And I heard all about Jim, but I didn't meet Jim. And we had a round robin in December. I was on the program about a month and a half, and I went to that round robin, and somebody said to me, how would you like to meet our founder? Of course, I was looking forward to that. And we walked over to where he was sitting. And, you know, I was talking to Dorothy G. in Cleveland the other day, and she said she always expected to see a great, big, robust man, real tall man with a booming voice. And that's really what I expected. And they took me over to this man, had white hair, gentle, sweet. And they introduced me to him, and they said, she's a new member in GA. And he took my hands in between his 2 hands and kissed them. And he said, welcome, honey. We need you. You know that was the first time in my whole life that anybody had ever said, we need you, or I need you. I was nothing but a thorn in the side of my mother and father, and my sisters and my brothers, and my children, and my husband. I was nothing but a thorn in their side. And here was somebody that was telling me, we need you. And I fell in love with that man. I fell in love with him. He became my idol. He became my God. And I fought for him. And I struggled for him. And about a month and a half after I came in, Harold B. came in. And we kind of got together, and there was a lot of strife in GA. A lot of it. We were having growing pains. There was fighting, there was throwing chairs. There were all sorts of things. People being beaten up, court cases, name it. It was going on in Gamblers Anonymous. And always on Jim's side was Belle and Harold. And Harold and Belle. And we were really ostracized. You know what? I really didn't care. Because there was my God and my idol. But you know, I found out that he was not a God. He was not an idol. He was a human being with frailty. And he didn't do everything right. You know, I've been told many, many times that, gee, if he hadn't started it, somebody else would have. That's true. Somebody might have. Maybe 7 days later, maybe 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, maybe 25 years later. Somebody else may have started it. The fact still remains that Jim started it. What a beautiful little man that was. I remember last year at the conference. And I was very disappointed that I didn't get to go up and say a few words about him. And after it was all over, and he asked somebody for me to please come see him. And I went over to him, and he said, "Hello, my darling. Hello, my friend." And again, he kissed my hands and he kissed my cheek. It was very hard to understand him. I hugged him. He says, "You know, I had been writing some papers that I want to give to you. I never received those papers. So Norma, if you have them, I would like to have them." What can I say about the man who directly saved my life? The man who, you know, the gambling has nothing to do with it anymore. I don't even think about the gambling. It doesn't even faze me. But the fact that I became a human being is purely due to Jim. Because he taught me to love, he taught me to feel, he taught me compassion, he taught me everything I know, really, because I was a real bitch before I came into this program. You know, there were times when I didn't see him for a long time, and then he'd come back. And I was always so happy to see him. I remember going with he and Norma, being at their house. I loved that man. I know he did a lot of things that weren't proper, according to some people. I know he went back to gambling. I know he went back to drinking. But he had stopped a long time before he left us. I'll never forget that man. You know, when Norma called me the other day and told me that he had passed away, I had such a lump in my stomach and such a horrible feeling in my heart. And then I said, you know, it's almost a blessing, really, because he couldn't speak, he couldn't walk, he couldn't do any of the things that Bob said that Jim loved to do. How well I remember that motorcycle. He drove it in from the valley, and he could hardly see to my house. Got in the car with me, and we went from one used car dealer to another to find Jim a car. And there wasn't a car that suited Jim. So he got on his motorcycle, and he went back home. And it's true, he couldn't see, he couldn't hear, but he drove that motorcycle. I know there are a lot of people that tell me I'm crazy because I revere this man, but I do. And I don't care what anybody says. I really don't care what anybody says. I revere this man. I revere the fact that he saved my life. I revere the fact that he started something that has grown, that is growing for 26 years. But he started it. Nobody else did. He did. And Jim, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I thank you with all my heart and soul, and I love you. Thank you.
I love you. Thank you, Bill. That was just beautiful. That was just beautiful. I'm really thrilled to hear you say that about Jim because he's my dearest friend. And so naturally, when you say something nice about my dearest friend, it's a thrill to me. Jim always wanted to start GA. Jim always, I see Bud McDonald laughing. Bud McDonald remembers. Bud McDonald met Jim back in 1954, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? 53? Yeah, 53. And I met him in 1952. And Jim always talked about this gambling thing, like the rest of us talked about alcohol. And I kind of thought, well, so okay, fine, just use the AA program. I have since come to learn through my own efforts to lose weight that if you have a problem, you better have a group for each other. That's the fact. I really think I find that I cannot apply the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous to my overeating problems. Nor can I apply my gambling problems to the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. You need the support of those groups who are involved. Let me tell you about, those of you who don't know, about Algamus. Algamus was the forerunner of Gamblers Anonymous. There was 4 of us who belonged to it. This Algamus, the name Algamus is derived from alcoholic gamblers. I had gone through what I like to refer to as drunkruptcy and had in my possession an old machine shop. That's all that was left. This old machine shop, we converted it into a meeting hall and called it the hayloft. And Jim, right away, Jim was an organizer. Now, you know the floor of an old machine shop is no place to dance. So what did Jim to go? He goes out and hires a crew and has a hardwood floor put in there so we could have dances. And he decided that he was going to start this alcoholic gambler group. So he got 4 guys. One guy's name was Red Toothman. And you'll find this in that original book of GA. One guy's name was Red Toothman. The other guy's, I suppose in the book it probably says Red Tea. The other guy's name was Johnny Wilson, and that was probably Johnny W. The other guy was Bob C. That's Bob Corbin, that was me, and Jim Willis. Now, we sat around a card table. There was only 4 of us. And we had a secret handshake. Rozanne, give me your hand. I'll show you how to do it. We would walk up, and we would touch these 2 fingers on the artery to check your pulse. This is our secret handshake. I'm not kidding. And we knew it was humor. That was part of Willis's humor. And if the pulse was running a little too rapidly, you would probably just place the bet. And we would vote you in and out of the organization. And we would vote by stamping our feet under the table. 2 votes stamped you were in, and 1 you were gone. And so as it says in this book, Jim says how Algamus finally became defunct. It says that Johnny W. decided he was no longer an alcoholic, so he left. The Red T decided he was not a gambler, so he left. The Bob C decided he was neither, and he left. That was I like to know that. It was also, I understand, I'm looking forward really to listening to hearing this because I do not know the details of this other than as Jim told them to me. Jim, one time long ago, had something to do with forming another group. I'm not going to talk about it at all. I'm going to let the founder of that organization explain it to you in her own words, Rozanne.
I mean, maybe tall and hard, but here I am. I'm Rozanne. Oh.
Wow.
Oh boy. That's terrific. Now I know how covering feels. I'm Rozanne, a compulsive overeater.
Hi, Rozanne.
And a friend of Jim Willis, also. I have wonderful memories of Jim. I got to tell you how it came about. In 1958, November of 1958, I was sitting at night. My binge time is at night for all of you overeaters, the gamblers. Well, you get the idea. Anyway, my binge time was at night with my peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwiches. And the kids were in bed, my husband was in bed, 10 o'clock at night, and I'm sitting with my binges. And I'm watching Paul Coates. Never been to an AA meeting. Oh, God, was I scared of him. Didn't know anything about it. And I see two men, the backs of their heads to the camera, and Paul Coates is interviewing them. And I'm saying, well, turn around already. But Marv is my husband, a Normie. You know a Normie? He's a Normie. He and I had a friend who's a gambler. And I'm listening to this thing and listening, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that's perfect for that guy. I am such a world saver. I tell you, you got a problem? I'll solve it. So Mark and I took his friend to a GA meeting. In fact, I remember running over to the phone, I should have known better. I've worked in television. Calling the station at 10 o'clock at night. What a stupid thing to do. To find out about this thing, and she said call in the morning. Bright and early, I called, got the address, and Mark and I took his friend down. I got to tell you, my life was changed that night. I'm not a gambler in that sense. In the sense of the GA people, I gamble in other ways in life. But it was all men. The sprinkling of women who were there was wives. And you know that room, and I don't know if I was an atheist or an agnostic, but I didn't believe in God. And that room got so bright that night for me. I heard them talking about lying and cheating and stealing, and I thought, oh, God, I'm not alone. I am not alone. I thought I was the only person doing this stuff. And my life changed, but my eating didn't change. You know how it is. So I went back to eating that year. The following year, I was a lot fatter than I am now, a lot fatter. And I couldn't find TOPS, which was the only organization for overweight people then. So I said to Mark, I'm going back to GA and see if I can start a group like that for people like me. So I went back to GA. Now, I'm 5 feet tall. I was then 5'2". I'm 5 feet tall. Jim is, I don't know, he was 8 feet something. And I was very fat, and you know about Jim, he was so skinny. And I looked up at him, and I said, this is after the meeting, and I had the same effect at the second meeting. I said, do you think that you could help me do you think that I could start a group like yours for people like me? And you know, I can hear Jim's voice. He had the gentlest, sweetest, most patient voice. That happens with me. And he said, yeah, I don't see why not. I didn't know Jim was in AA. I didn't know that he could see the connection between these compulsions. But he could. And at that time, I believed something I have always believed, that someday OA would be as big as AA all around the world. AA was then 25 years old, which is about what we're going to be in a year. And at the anniversary banquet that Belle spoke about, I had a chance to come to Jim Hotel. OA is now close to 6,800 groups in 38 countries with nearly 100,000 members. And I had a chance to tell that to Jim because Jim knew about it when there was nothing at all, not even a name. So he said, yes, I'll help you. And I went home, and Marvin and I thought up the name of this non-existent organization.
This was December of 1959. But Jim, he was always so ready to help me. And I'll tell you, you know about self-will? Well, you don't know about self-will online. He encouraged me, and it took some encouraging, because when you're starting your own game, you can make your own rules. And what I said is, I'm a professional writer, and that Bill Wilson writes so corny. And besides, I don't believe in God. So this went in next through step 3, and out it came. And out came spiritual awakening. Out came God everywhere. Then I sat at my typewriter and I said, if I want this to sound like AA, I gotta sprinkle God a little bit somewhere here. So I did that. And Jim took a look at that. Oh boy. But he didn't say anything then. He helped me. We also had personality problems all the way through OA. Now, we didn't throw chairs. I don't know why, but we threw barbs. The women in OA, I gotta tell you, when they want to, we closed it to men in the beginning. So, and they could be cool, and I called Jim crying. And he was so patient. I said, what do we do about the crosstalk? We're all sitting around crosstalking. Honey, I can hear you now, honey. You set up your chairs in rows. Well, there were 3 of us. So you have 2 chairs here and a leader up in front, and you don't have any interruptions, and that's the way you do it. Well, we have a book in OA called I Put My Hand in Yours, which is sold more outside the LA area than it is here. Most of that book comes from the stuff that Jim told me 24 years ago. We're going to be 24 years old January 19th. Now, we too were going to go on fall coats. I couldn't stand it. I was 110. I had to carry this message. Oh, I don't know what message, considering that there was no God. And I called Jim and I said, you won't believe it. This is 10 months later. We're going on fall coats. On this story is pure Jim. And he said, honey, you have to put the steps back. And in place of step 3, I had put in something about going to a doctor of our own choosing. Now I just know the Bank of America. So I said, I didn't want anyone telling me how to run my organization. You understand that? And he said, look, put it in the body, in the copy of the body of the copy you're going to write. You're going to write a brochure, aren't you? Sure, I'm going to write a brochure. Put it in there about the doctors. Put step 3 back in. It took him the whole evening to talk me into this. GA had at that time normal way of thinking and living. I guess still does in one of its steps. So I didn't know about AA's word, sanity. So we left that in. And then he talked to me about spiritual awakening. And you see, I didn't know I'd already had one. I really didn't realize that. But in the end, most, but not all, of the steps were changed. And then he talked to me about God. In fact, I wrote this into a musical that I wrote for OA a few years ago. And this is what Jim, anybody here has doubts. This is what Jim said to me. Look, you go to a meeting, I said, there's no God. I am not so weak I have to turn my life and my will over to the care of any God, whether he exists or not. And Jim said, look, you know how he said? Look, really calm, patient for this woman. I'm 31 years old, running right over everything. I'm 54, you don't have to add. He said, you go to a meeting every week. We had one meeting then, at the time he told me this. And you talk to somebody every day, because my neighbor and I wheeled our kids to the park, and we had our little in-between meeting. And he said, that's a power outside of you. And then he said, you are will powerless over food, and willpower is a dieter's term. Well, maybe it's a gambler and an alcoholic term, but it's a dieter's term. He said, why don't you say you're will powerless over food? Take the capital P off of power and make it a small p. And with that, Jim opened the door to God for me. I didn't step through, but he opened the door. So I changed the steps back. I even made it a capital P. I'm happy, but I did it. So OA had the original steps, the transitional steps, and the steps we have today, which are like AA, except for our uncommon compulsion. Let me see. Oh my God, I forgot. Jim insisted we go to AA. Now, by that time, I don't know whether I've seen Lost Weekend or whatever, but you know, I was so scared. And I said to him, "Oh, Jim, we'll be accosted." He said, "Honey," he called over women, honey, I guess. "Honey, the drunks are out on the, no, he said, the sober people are in AA, protecting you. The drunks are out on the freeways, killing us all. Go to AA." So I told my friend, my co-founder, who has, I'm the only one left from that first year. But at that time, I said, "We gotta go to AA." "Who says so?" "Jim." "What the hell is the Jim?" And I said, "We have to go to AA. We are not getting anywhere with this organization." Those women were pressing around, you know, with that thing, gaining weight, losing weight. They weren't doing anything. Joe and I were the only ones who were losing weight. We didn't have the term abstinence then. And I went to AA. I had then been to two, maybe three GA meetings, and no AA meetings. So you know where my knowledge was. We went to AA. You know, OA for 10 years had AA speakers come in and help us to teach us the program. It was then that I realized that we didn't know anything at all. I was the first time I ever said that I didn't know anything, that I knew less than you. Oh well. Anyway, I think that my experience with Jim went on for until about maybe 1964, 65, when Dear Abby ran our first letter about us. And I told him we had 7,000 letters in reply, and he helped me to set up some form letters. And I mean, he really helped us all the way through. It is my feeling that OA wouldn't be where it is today without Jim Willis. Because if it had been up to me, I would have run that poor little organization right into the ground. I tell you, I just wanted things my way. I didn't even know what way was my way. But I wanted things my own way. And when you step on the toes of your fellows, believe me, they retaliate. So we had a lot of retaliation in OA. And Jim, I would call him crying. I didn't have a sponsor then. There was no one around to sponsor anybody. We didn't even know about that. I guess Jim was my first sponsor, although I never thought of him in that way because he didn't sponsor me in the sense that my first OA sponsor did with the 4th step. But Jim was OA's first sponsor. I never thought of that, but Jim was OA's first sponsor. And he really guided us and he helped us, and such patience with these women, such patience with me, with all the arguments I gave him. He was really quite remarkable. And he was so gentle. That's what I needed, somebody gentle. If he had said, "Listen, you gotta do it this way," I wouldn't have done it that way. But Jim wasn't like that. You know, this is a celebration of life today, this memorial meeting. And I think that the legacy, Jim is here, you know. He's here in all of us. And although we always don't know it, most of them, he's here in all of them too. He really is. He has a legacy of nearly 100,000 people in Overeaters Anonymous. That isn't even my legacy. It's Jim's legacy. Was it you who said, yeah, he did? People have said to me, well, if you hadn't started it, somebody else would have. That's true. And that's true. But whoever hadn't started needed someone like Jim for guidance. You can't do that alone. Bill Wilson had Ebby, and he had Dr. Tebow and Sister Nation and all those people. Jim had his guidance people, and we had Jim. And for that, I have been so grateful. We gave him an appreciation award last year, and I had said then to the LA Entry Group in OA and to the trustees, we can't wait for our 25th anniversary. Jim is very sick. I don't know if he'll be here for our 25th anniversary. So last January, which is our birthday celebration, the local interview gave him an award at our dinner, at our luncheon. And in May, the delegates of Overeaters Anonymous gave him an appreciation award, and that was a wonderful thing. We brought him down, or Norma brought him down in a wheelchair, and he had a chance to see a room full of people standing up for him and applauding him for something that he did in his life, because Jim was a Catholic, a real channel of God. He got a letter from Bill Wilson around 1964, and I heard it read at the GA banquet. And I want to close with it because it touched me so. In part, it said, Bill said to Jim, when God can't come, he sends somebody else. And my feeling is that if God couldn't come, he sent Jim Willis to Overeaters Anonymous. And for that, I am eternally grateful.
Thank you, Rozanne. I'm eternally grateful to you for that. I really, really enjoyed and appreciated that. I've been wanting to hear that story a long time. There was a guy named Cy who came up to GA before he came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not going to give his last name. He's still living, but I know he wouldn't object to telling me tell the story because he tells it himself often when he gets a chance to speak either in GA or AA. He doesn't live in this state anymore. He lives in Indiana.
Yeah.
After he'd been on the program for 3 years, he said that what he had, his whole identity was in his business card. He said when somebody say, "Who are you?" he'd pull this card out and say, "That's who I am." Or the fact that he lost that job 10 years ago is totally beside the point. He still has these cards. He flashed this card on. That's who I am. And he had this image to keep up. He always dressed well. The French cut. And, I mean, he was... By the way, this necktie, I'm going to loosen this necktie because I know that's the way Jim would want it. He knows I hate neckties. Anyway, Cy had this image to maintain everywhere he went. And he was really down on his uppers. Things were going very, very bad. Then he said one day, I picked up the big book, and I read something in the big book I had never seen before. It said, when all other measures fail, hold up a bank. And he did. He went out and he held up a bank. And geez, it worked so well that he held up another bank. And he finally held up 4 banks. And he said, well, I'm going to, and he didn't start gambling again. He was paying off debt, and he was living up to the identity that this card said that he was. Hardly know the guy. Hardly back there laughing. A lot of you know the guy. This guy, and but I'm just not going to use his last name. And he tells about how when he finally got busted, the first phone call he made was to Jim Willis, and he called Jim Willis, and he says that he called both of his sponsors, and both of his sponsors, Jim was his VA sponsor, and Clancy was his AA sponsor. He called Jim first. Both of his sponsors were not known for ever being at a loss for words. But he said, when I told Jim that I was in jail, and Jim said, for what? And I said, for holding up 4 banks. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. And then he said the first words Jim says is, well, this will make a very interesting adjunct to your talk. This meeting is being conducted according to the wishes of Mrs. Norma W. And I am a firm believer somehow that Jim is aware of all that's going on here. And I think he would approve. I first laid eyes on Jim at a meeting. I had been in AA since 1949, but I wasn't making out too good there either, down in Downey, where the people were showing up in Cadillacs and mink stoles, and I finally found a place called Hole in the Ground, which just fit me to a T, because they talked about throwing up and things like that I understood, about what the inside of the toilet bowl looked like when you were on your hands and knees, and I could identify with the this very first meeting, there was this blondish, gray-haired guy sitting in the front row with glasses that looked like the end of Coke bottles that were so thick. And he had this hearing aid on with the old type that, you know, the kind you hold in your pocket. And a guy named Tony Lubin got up to start the meeting, and the first thing he said was, "Hey, you deaf old SO, turn up your hearing aid." And I thought, what a terrible way to talk to a poor old man. Of course, it was Jim Willis. And what this was, and what I didn't recognize, is this was great love between these guys. They knew one another real well. And we could love, you know the old saying, smile when you say that. Well, we did. We could tease one another. We could call one another awful names. And so Jim Willis would always turn, whenever Tony got up, he would always turn his hearing aid off. And what we would do is we would sit there, and you see, that hearing aid, in those days, all that thing really was nothing more than a microphone. And so when Jim would get bored with Rachel Norris, when Rachel Norris would start pontificating, and he would take the hearing aid out of his shirt pocket and hand it to me. He still had the thing in his ear, though, and he'd have me talk to it. And I'd talk to him, and this guy sounds like a phony to me, Jim. And then we'd trade, and Jim would talk to me all through the meeting, and this is how we had a little trouble staying sober in those years, too, by the way. I want to add. But we did have fun. We had our ups and downs. We had our fights. Jim and I, you talk about throwing chairs. Jim and I had a knockdown, drag-out fight once in the Los Angeles Central Office, and we actually came to physical blows. But we never were not friends. This is a very strange thing. We were always friends. I mean, after the fight, after the time he got his bridge fixed, and I never did get my tooth back, we were friends again, and he plays the most important part in my life of any man that I have ever known. Not because he was my sponsor or because he founded anything that I've ever belonged to. It's just that he was the dearest friend I ever had. Now, as I say, I have this vision of him in this Captain Horatio's version of heaven as the big fisherman now, the great fisherman. He's selling sanddabs all over the place up there. I really see him that way. And he's got himself a big schooner, and he's at the helm and up on the bridge there saying all those things that captains of ships say. He doesn't know what they mean still, but he would be saying that. I am a believer, and Jim used to believe this too, that life is, Jim used to love to have me talk astronomy to him, because that's one of my great interests in life. And he used to love to have me talk about the expanding universe. And he really liked to, remember how he used to love to have me talk about astronomy to him. And Jim began to believe that if the universe is continually expanding forever into infinity without end, he believed that life was that way too. And that it was not, it didn't end, nor did, after you died and went somewhere else, if you did you suddenly know all the answers. He felt that it was a continual process of forever learning. And I believe that that is true. Now, he asked me 25, 30 years ago, at this occasion, to read this. So I'm going to conclude our meeting with the reading of this. This is by Alfred Lord Tennyson. By the way, one of his favorite authors of all was Booth Tarkington. And he was forever quoting Penrod and Sam. He loved Penrod and Sam more than anything else. And he loved the story of Penrod. When Penrod went, I have to tell this, Penrod used to send, because this happened to Jim, his mother used to send him to Sunday school when he was a little boy. And the story parallels Jim's life. If you want to know what Jim was like when he was a little boy, read Booth Tarkington's Penrod and Sam. Jim had gone to Sunday school, and his mother used to give him 2 nickels tied up in a handkerchief. And one Sunday, the basket got by before he could untie the handkerchief. And well, the same thing happened to Booth Tarkington's Penrod and Penrod. And so he tells about how Penrod, now he's coming home from church and he's jingling 2 nickels. And it says that Penrod began to envision a small but steady income. He said, and so did I. And he placed his first bet with the money that he got by not putting in the basket. So I thought I would tell you that. Now here, this is crossing the bar
by Alfred Lord Tennyson, which Jim requests be read here. And so just imagine that this is Jim saying it because this is what he wanted to say. And this is not a tearjerker, but all of us who have compulsive behavior, we're all emotional. So let's do the best we can. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I set out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full of sound and foam, when that drew from out the boundless deep, turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. Thank you very much.